A woman in a blue dress walks across a bridge in North Georgia. Witnesses say she has no hands. They say she is looking for something in the water below. The bridge crosses Lake Lanier, a reservoir that draws 11 million visitors a year, boaters, fishermen, families on jet skis. It is also, by several measures, one of the deadliest recreational lakes in the United States. Since it was filled in 1956, an estimated 700 people have died in its waters. More than 200 of them since 1994. To understand why, you have to go back before the lake existed. Before the dam. Before the water covered anything at all. Because there is a town down there. And the story people tell about that town is not quite the story that happened. In the early 1900s, this stretch of North Georgia was farmland. Red clay, cotton fields, a scatter of small communities connected by dirt roads. One of them was called Oscarville, a rural crossroads in Forsyth County, about 40 miles northeast of Atlanta. Black and white families lived and worked the land there, some as tenant farmers, some as landowners. By 1912, nearly 1,100 black residents called Forsyth County home. 58 of them owned their land outright, no small thing in the Jim Crow South. That September, everything changed in the space of 2 weeks. A white woman named Ellen Grice accused a black man of assaulting her in her home. Days later, 18-year-old May Crow, also white, was found beaten and unconscious in the woods near Oscarville. She died a month afterward. What followed was not a trial in any real sense. It was a manhunt. Sheriff's deputies arrested several black men on little more than suspicion. A mob dragged one of them, Rob Edwards, from his jail cell and lynched him in the town square. 2 teenagers, Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel, were convicted by an all-white jury after proceedings that lasted, in one case, a matter of minutes. They were hanged before a crowd of thousands. That should have been the end of it. It was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, night riders swept through Forsyth County, burning homes, posting warnings, firing into houses in the dark. It was a campaign with one goal: make it impossible for black families to stay. And it worked. By the end of 1912, nearly every black resident of the county was gone. Land was abandoned or sold for almost nothing. Businesses shut down. Churches emptied. Forsyth County became, and would remain for the better part of 80 years, an all-white county, one of the last of its kind in America, with almost no black residents recorded there again until the 1990s. That history is documented. It is not in dispute. What happened next to the land itself is where the story gets complicated, and where a persistent legend has quietly rewritten the facts. For decades afterward, the story told about Lake Lanier was this: that the reservoir was built directly on top of Oscarville, drowning a thriving black town beneath its surface, as if the flood itself had finished what the mob started. It is a story that has circulated in documentaries, viral social media posts, and even a widely shared comedy sketch. And it is easy to understand why it took hold. It fits a pattern seen elsewhere in American history. Black communities erased, their land seized or submerged, their story quietly buried along with the ground beneath it. But historians at the Atlanta History Center, working directly with descendants of the expelled families, have spent years piecing together what actually happened. And the record tells a different, stranger story. Oscarville was not a black town. Census records show it was predominantly white. And the lake that now covers it was not built until 1956, 4 to 4 years after the expulsion, long after the black families of Forsyth County had already been driven out, their homes already gone, their land already resold to white residents who stayed. The dam wasn't built to erase them. They had already been erased. What the lake did was cover the empty scar that was left behind. By 1950, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had a different problem to solve. Atlanta was growing fast, and it needed water, for drinking, for electricity, for the region's booming post-war economy. The Chattahoochee River was the answer. Engineers proposed a dam at a site called Buford, which would back the river up into a sprawling reservoir stretching across 4 counties. Construction began in 1950. The Corps spent years surveying the valley, condemning land, relocating roughly 700 families, and, according to their own records, attempting to exhume and relocate the graves buried in the valley's 20 or so cemeteries. That word attempting matters. The Corps has since acknowledged that its relocation effort was incomplete. Some graves were missed. Some were simply too old, too unmarked, too deteriorated to find. In 2020, an Army Corps spokesperson admitted publicly that unmarked burials from the antebellum era, the Civil War, even earlier indigenous settlement, likely remains somewhere beneath the lake to this day. In 1956, the gates of Buford Dam closed. Over the next 3 years, the Chattahoochee backed up and swallowed the valley. Farmhouses, roads, bridges, storefronts, an entire landscape people had once walked through on foot disappeared beneath 59 feet of water at full pool. By 1958, Lake Lanier was complete, 38,000 acres of reservoir, one of the largest man-made lakes in the country, a gleaming new symbol of Atlanta's growth. It should have been simple after that. A lake, a resource, a place for families to spend the weekend. Instead, the deaths began almost immediately. In April 1958, the same year the lake reached full pool, 2 young women, Susie Roberts and Delia Mae Parker Young, left to dance in nearby Dawsonville. They stopped for gas along the way and, according to later accounts, drove off without paying. Crossing a bridge over the new lake that night, Roberts lost control of the car. It went through the guardrail and into the water. Both women vanished. A year later, a fisherman found a body floating near the bridge. A woman in a blue dress, badly decomposed, both hands missing. No one could identify her. It would take 31 years to find out why. In 1990, construction crews working near the same bridge discovered a 1950s Ford sedan resting on the lake bed, 30 meters down. Inside were human remains. Forensic testing matched them to Susie Roberts, which meant the body found in 1959, the woman in the blue dress, had to be Delia Mae Parker Young. Somewhere in that gap between 1958 and 1990, a legend had already taken shape. Locals on the bridge at night began reporting a figure in a blue dress, walking the railing, hands missing. They called her the Lady of the Lake. They said she pulled swimmers under. They said she was still looking for her hands. By the time science finally identified her, the story no longer needed the facts to survive. The Lady of the Lake might have stayed a local ghost story, the kind every lake town tells about its water, except the deaths kept happening. And they kept happening at a rate that outpaced almost every comparable body of water in the country. On Christmas Day, 1964, a station wagon carrying 11 people from 2 families spun off a bridge and into the lake. 5 children and 2 adults drowned. It remains the deadliest single day in the lake's history. The pattern continued for decades: boating accidents, drownings, disappearances, bodies recovered months or years after the fact. Some years brought more than 20 deaths. Officials point to unglamorous, well-documented causes: alcohol on the water, a lack of life jackets, submerged trees and structures left behind when the valley was flooded, water that turns murky and disorienting only a few feet below the surface. Between 2008 and 2018 alone, Georgia recorded more than 500 boating under the influence violations on the lake. But some deaths have defied even those explanations. In July 2023, a 24-year-old man named Thomas Milner jumped into the water near a dock and immediately began screaming. A neighbor who went in after him felt it too, an electrical current running through the lake itself, leaking from a faulty boat lift. By the time the power was cut and Milner pulled from the water, he was gone. It was electric shock drowning, a phenomenon most swimmers have never heard of and can't see coming. Divers who work the lake regularly describe visibility measured in inches, not feet, a black, silty world where a fallen tree, a stone foundation, or a submerged road can appear without warning. Search and recovery teams have talked about surfacing with more than they went looking for, human remains that predate any known accident, bones with no name attached to them at all. 27 people who died in the lake, by one estimate, were never recovered. None of this proves a curse. Officials are careful, and rightly so, to separate documented cause of death from folklore. A submerged tree stump is not a vengeful spirit. A blood alcohol level is not a haunting. But it is also true that a lake built over unmarked graves, in a county built on the forced removal of more than 1,000 people, will never be just a lake to the people who live around it. The Lady of the Lake endures not because anyone can prove she is real, but because the story she tells, a woman erased, then blamed for the danger of the water that erased her, echoes something true about the ground underneath. Forsyth County did not begin reckoning with 1912 until nearly 8 decades later. In 1987, civil rights marchers walked through the county to mark Martin Luther King Jr. Day and were met by a mob throwing rocks and shouting racial slurs, a scene broadcast on national news, a county still defending, in living memory, the same expulsion the lake now sits near. It took another 30 years after that for institutions like the Atlanta History Center to begin formally collecting the testimonies of the expelled family's descendants, voices that had waited more than a century to be recorded. Today, Lake Lanier is one of the most visited lakes in the country. Families grill on its shoreline. Marinas do brisk business every summer weekend. Most visitors have no idea what happened in this valley before the water came. The lynchings, the burnings, the 1,000 families who left everything behind and never came back. Fewer still know that the popular story they may have heard, a black town flooded on purpose, isn't what the historical record shows, and that the real history is, in its own way, harder to look away from. Not a single act of destruction hidden by water, but an erasure that had already been finished on dry land, in broad daylight, decades before the first drop ever rose to cover it. The lake didn't bury that history. People did. The water just came later and made it easier to forget. Which may be the truest ghost story here. Not a woman in a blue dress on a bridge, but a county that spent most of a century trying not to remember what happened before the water rose, and a lake that keeps finding ways to make people ask anyway.
Thanks for watching till end. Subscribe to our channel also. See you soon, guys.